Chapter 226. Re-evaluation, Juvain said, tilting his head. Then the Emperor's aide, who handed the papers over, frowned and rebuked Luigi Angenes. If you are concerned that we made a mistake in the calculation now. The calculation is not the problem, the head of Angenes shouted in frustration. What is it then? Please reassess the lands to make sure the size of each estate is properly measured. That makes no sense. Even if you're desperate, there's a limit to how you can make demands. Most nobles shook their heads and clicked their tongues. However, Luigi Angenes kept his shameless face straight and looked only at Emperor Jovanes. Probably by this point, he seemed to have no doubts, believing that the Emperor would side with him. After I watched the Emperor taking a glance at Perez at his side, I turned to look at Luigi and opened my mouth. Head Angenes, I slowly clasped my fingers and called him. What is it, Deputy Head Lombardi? Head Angenes replied with displeasure when I called him. Are you saying that the difference is so small that you can't accept it? That's right. I nodded a couple of times, and this time I asked Emperor Jovanes. What do you think, Your Majesty? What do you mean? Are you reluctant to make a judgment only because of the slight difference in size? Well, that's right. So does the rule still applies in which the size of the estate should be the only standard for selecting a representative family? It is. Then I'll help you decide, Your Majesty. I said so and slowly got up from my seat. I don't need to be hasty since I already made a move on the board the way I planned it. As I walked, countless eyes moved together with my steps. My whole body was thrilled by their passionate gazes. When I reached the Emperor, I presented the documents I prepared from the mansion. That's why I cherished in my safe. That's what I cherished in my safe. Rattle. Empress Robini was surprised and raised her body halfway, which made the chair rattle. What's this? Emperor Jovanes asked me as he received the documents. I looked back at Empress Robini and replied, that is the contract that the Angenes family signed when they borrowed money from the pellet company. You have a hard time finding this, don't you? Henforex estate is held as collateral. The day I attended the nobles' meeting, the nature of the bundle of papers Clarivan brought was the contract he underwrote with the Angenes. I moved it to the Lombardi's mansion in advance because I anticipated that the Empress would definitely aim for it, and she did when she was dead set on finding Clarivan. Being a member of the imperial family, if the Empress' weakness was hiding in the Lombardi mansion, she will lose her power. I lifted one corner of my mouth so that only Empress Robini could see. No, Your Majesty, as expected. As soon as I finished, the Empress took the stack of documents. You should have done that before. I was bored with only dealing with Luigi. What do you mean by no? You didn't borrow the money, Empress? It's not that. The Empress outright glared at me and said, I meant that the deputy head of Lombardy was making a very big misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Yes. The contract is between the Angenes family and the pallet company. Lombardy is not in a position where they could intervene. Then she added in a cold voice. Also, could it even be possible to act as a representative of the criminal just because it was hidden in Lombardy? Criminal? What do you mean by that, Empress? I'm not going to let it slide this time either. Aren't you saying too much? Aren't you falsely accusing someone without proving evidence? I added one more thing, giving it a boost. There is no evidence or witnesses to prove that Clarivan Pellet was involved in the attempted murder of His Majesty. So why are you making such a claim? Are you just rousing suspicions? Or did you need an excuse to topple over the pellet company and find this contract? What? The Empress screamed, looking like she was going to kill me right this instant. Everyone in the conference hall heard me. Then they began to nod their heads in agreement. If she made a contract with her estate as collateral, then, is that why the pellet company? If that's the case, then it made sense. The eyes of the Empress and the head of Angenes have changed completely from before. As the chatter continued, it was not long before those who initially thought, is that really so? Suddenly changed to, so that's what happened. In the meantime, Emperor Jovanes was reading the documents I gave him, one after another. It clearly stated here that the involved parties to the contract are only the owner of the pellet company and Angenes. The Empress is right. Jovanes, you fool. Perez may have given him a hint in advance, but he was still on the side of Angenes, albeit vaguely. Such a man is the current emperor of the empire, I thought, holding back a sigh. If so, I will have to check it with the Empress. Emperor Jovanes raised his head briefly as if telling me that he would do so. The Angenes family did not pay the last and previous interest. Also, the interest for this month has not yet been paid. Is that correct? She looked down at me with chilly blue eyes. In fact, after borrowing money, the Angenes family never paid interest. Angenes do not pay interest even when they borrow money. It sounds ridiculous, but it was customary. Most of the people who have lent money to them, who are in great power, are trying to line up at Angenes. Even the fact that the contract contains the conditions on payment interest. If the Angenes do not pay the interest, the lenders will have to tolerate it because their opponent is the Empress family. Therefore, Empress Rubini didn't pay the interest because she thought that Clarivan was trying to impress her. I asked again, is this true, Empress? Empress Rubini's closed fists were trembling as she shut her mouth tightly. You have nothing more to say, it seems. Your Majesty, if you look at the last page of the contract, there is a condition for for the exercise of collateral rights. At my words, Jovanes glanced at the Empress before opening the last page of the contract. It says that if Anjana is unable to repay the interest and principal, the owner of the pellet company becomes the owner of the Henforek estate, which is the collateral. And it also states exactly what will happen if they can pay the interest and the principal back. I held my hand up and raised three fingers. Three times. If you can pay the interest three times, you'll be met with a condition where the lien gives the lender the right to take your property if you fail to pay back the whole interest and principal. When writing the contract with Claravan, the Empress must have known this because she had checked it herself. It's a condition written under the contract where the owner can exercise its rights to use the collateral as security to pay back a lien's loan. That's why she used the last card, which is the Imperial Knights, to chase after Clarivan and search high and low. Ha! The Emperor suddenly burst into laughter. Even so, it's only a matter between the Angenes and Clarivan Pellet, the owner of the pellet company. You do not have the right to use the collateral, even as a representative, deputy head. She continued with a crooked smile. Are you going to bring Clarivan Pellet here? If Clarivan probably stepped out of the Lombardy mansion right now, he will be killed right away, because Empress Rubini will do anything to protect their position as the representative of the West. Your Majesty, please call Clarivan Pellet here. Now she even tries to persuade Emperor Jovanes. I can't take this anymore. You don't have to, Your Majesty. You're done now, Empress. The owner of the pellet company is here. The crowd who had been holding their breath quickly stirred up. Clarivan Pellet is here? Did he sneak in? I forgot that the nobles were in the meeting and looked around. What do you mean, Deputy Head? Explain. Emperor Jovanes also leaned towards me and asked, urging me to answer. Just like I said, the pellet company's owner is here, I said, and smiled at Empress Rubini. The owner of the pellet company is me, Florentia Lombardi. The surroundings became quiet in an instant. I couldn't even hear the sound of breathing at the conference hall. Only a dull silence flowed as if someone had covered my ears tightly with both hands. Then a cry came from the Empress. What? At the same time, once again, a noisy wave swept through the hall. Am I hearing it right? The owner of the pellet is the deputy head. Does anyone know how old the deputy head of Lombardy is this year? It's a mess. The huge conference hall, which can accommodate hundreds of people, has become as noisy as a street market. Coming out of that noisy field, Empress Rubini and I were facing each other. At first, the blue eyes, which seemed to have hardened and unmoving, gradually began to shake. You must want to believe that I'm lying, but I'm sure you're feeling it instinctively. That I meant what I said. I smiled and watched her with sincere eyes. Empress Rubini is falling apart. How will you prove? Do you have? Emperor Jovanes asked me in a rather strangled voice, quite surprised. May I call the commander of the Knights of Lombardy inside for a moment, Your Majesty? Yes, you may. At the behest of the Emperor, the servant ran outside, and shortly after, Sir Lambert Lombardy entered the conference hall. Sir Lombardy, will you give me the envelope I left in the carriage? Suddenly called over to the scene of chaos and confusion, Sir Lombardy nodded with a what the hell is going on kind of face. After he came back, he handed me an envelope that had been in his thick armor. I took a piece of paper out of it and showed it to the Emperor. It's an employment contract written by me and Caravan Pellet when the pellet company was first created. Employment contract? The Emperor accepted it with a puzzled face. The content of the contract was simple. I, Florentia Lombardi, the owner of the pellet company, employ Claravan Pellet as its merchant guild leader. As my representative, Claravan Pellet will be entrusted with full authority over the merchant guild, and this employment contract remains in effect indefinitely unless Claravan Pellet requests termination of the contract. And beneath it was the date of the year I turned 11, and the signatures of me and Claravan can be seen side by side. I felt like I would love seeing my crooked handwriting as a child. I used to write each word in every letter. As you can see, I am the owner of the pellet company, and Claravan Pellet is the one I employed as the merchant guild leader. Instead of the ineffable Emperor and Empress, I looked at Perez. He was smiling. Red lips drew a perfect curve, and eyes full of warm affection were looking at me. The moment when my secret, which I have kept for a very long time, is revealed to the world, he is the one who's closest to me. I smiled at Perez and then took the employment contract halfway from the Emperor's hand. Ah, I got a fingerprint. How important this is. I thought, holding Clarivan's lifelong employment contract, folded it and tucked it into the envelope. As the owner of the pellet company, I will exercise my rights to secure the estate of Henforek. Just one statement will do. The land is mine now, and I can do with it as I please. Can I have it back, Your Majesty? I said, pointing to the contract between the Angenas and Pellet. Yes, here you go. Emperor Jovanes handed over the contract he had in his other hand. Look at this. There's a fingerprint here too. But this time, I didn't care much. It's not even mine. I quickly handed over the contract to the head of Brown. I will transfer the Henforek estate to the Brown family. This is the end of the game. Although the Henforek estate is said to be a land the size of a nail, it is only a nail on the map of the empire, but in reality, it is a land where the vast and empty fields are very spectacular. Oh, thank you, Deputy Head Lombardi, Brown said as he received the bundle of contracts with both hands. Don't mention it. I walked slowly again and returned to my seat and sat down. Now everyone in the conference hall was looking at Jovains. Then, it was when Jovains had just opened his mouth that he was being pushed back by the unspoken pressure. Your Majesty, please. Empress Rabini grabbed Jovains by the arm. You can't do this. You can't. Empress Rabini's voice was shaking. She used all her cards to defend herself, but eventually lost. All she could do now was to plead with the Emperor. The usual high profile and imposing appearance of the Empress is nowhere to be found. Her big eyes filled with tears that seemed to flow at any moment. You might be swayed for a moment by that miserable look. But Emperor Jovains shook his head coldly and pulled out his arm from her grip, and declared, the Brown family has become the new representative of the West. Thump, thump. I felt like I was hearing such a cheerful sound from somewhere. It feels empty because there isn't. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Joe Vanes threw off his coat roughly on the couch. Even though he didn't drink a sip, his face was red and his head hurts. After the meeting, he went on hawk hunting and as scheduled, but he had to come back soon. It was because he wasn't feeling well. Call the doctor, Joe Vanes cried out loud as he sat on the bed. Now that the West is cleared up, it will be a little quieter. For the Emperor, the meeting held during the morning meant that it was annoying and troublesome work. Perhaps that is the reason why he was not in a good shape right now. Thinking about the confrontation between Lombardi and Angenas that had been going on, his head seemed to throb more. Jovane stood up, looking at the bottle of liquor by his bedside. I can't believe the little one had such a secret. Ah, she's pretty good. Unstable shaking hands made it difficult to pour alcohol into the glass, so Jovane put his mouth directly on the bottle instead and gulped it down. Once, twice, it was at that moment. Ah! Emperor Jovane squeezed his chest and fell on the floor. Thud! A loud sound rang in the Emperor's bedroom. End of chapter 226. Chapter 227. The sun was about to set when I arrived at the Lombardi mansion. The carriage door was already open, but I didn't get off right away. As I sat down for a while, two familiar faces popped inside the carriage. Tia, aren't you getting off? Let's go quickly and have dinner. As promised before, I left the mansion earlier. A dinner gathering was scheduled for the whole family. Yes, I will go, I answered, but my body didn't move easily. Then Myron asked me, tilting his head, by any chance even Uncle didn't know? Is Tia really the owner of the pellet? When I didn't answer and looked away, the twins exclaimed, Wow, with their eyes wide open. Even Grandpa didn't know? Everyone would be very surprised. What if Grandfather falls down again because of how surprised he is? Oh, really, stop making fun of me, you two. I'm so nervous right now. I feel like dying. When I shouted, the twins burst into laughter, wearing the same faces. When they shrugged and said, Is there anything to be nervous about? Right, it's Tia anyway. What do you mean it's me anyway? Gilio answered my question first. Grandfather or uncle, everyone will be surprised at first, but in the end they will be happy for you. Because it's Tia. Who would think that you can do this? Mayron said, tapping on my shoulder. His warm hand wrapped around my shoulders. Because we are happy for you. They will be as well. Although it was a bit sad that you didn't tell us directly. But we understand. There must be a reason why Tia hasn't told anyone. You guys. When did you grow up like this? It seems like yesterday that I ran away and made excuses saying I didn't want to play hide and seek with them because I want to read books. But their playful comfort made me feel at ease. Thanks, Gilyu, Mayron. When I spoke in a slightly weak voice, the twins grinned. If you're having a hard time, tell us anytime. We will be right next to you and we will protect you. I grabbed both of their hands tightly and got off the carriage. My legs feel numb, as if I had been dragging my feet. So, one step at a time, I headed to my father's room. Knock, knock. Dad, I'm coming in. As I carefully opened the door, I saw my father putting books on the bookshelf. Tia, those are my favorite books. My father almost threw the book away as soon as he saw me entering the room. How did the meeting end? Thanks to the twins, my beating heart, which had subsided a little, started to beat fast again. My mouth seemed to be drying out of tension. When I didn't answer, my father looked at me anxiously. Tia, Dad, you'll cry, won't you? I'm sure you will cry. Still, I couldn't let them hear this through other people. I have to say it myself. If the change of the representative family didn't go well, Dad, let's talk a little bit, I said, leading my father to the center of the drawing room. But my father didn't sit on the chair. He was just staring at me with green eyes full of worry. I took a deep breath and clenched my fists. Dad, yes, Tia, actually, Clarivan and I were not in a mentor and student relationship. What? There was a slight wrinkle on my father's forehead. What do you mean, Tia? Somehow my father's voice lowered. Our relationship isn't between a mentor and a student, but between an employer and employee. I was going in circles without realizing it. No, it's much better to get it over with and be straightforward. I clenched my fists once again and said, As a matter of fact, I'm the owner of the pellet company. My father's eyes blinked slowly. It seemed like he was trying to understand what I was saying. Now, is it okay as it is? I faltered and approached my father. Dad? At that moment, my father staggered as if his legs had been loosened and plopped down on the sofa. I'm glad there's a chair nearby. Otherwise, my dad would have collapsed on the floor. Tia, so you. I'm the owner of the pellet company. The owner. My father talked to me, to himself, with a blank gaze, but soon shook his head. But then, Tia was only 11 years old at that time. Did you take over in the middle? My father's confused face immediately gave an expression who expected me to say, yes, that's right. No, from the beginning, Pellet was mine. My father sighed heavily and rubbed his face. I've been hiding it for more than a decade. In order not to earn other people's suspicion, I sometimes act and lie. You must be disappointed in me. Dad? My father's arm hugged me strongly to the extent that we swayed and nearly stumbled. I carefully looked up at my father's face. Are you all right? Confusion remained on my father's face. It seemed like he was trying to accept what I said. But before that, my father seems to have something to say first. You must have worked hard, Tia. That encourages me. My father's warm hands patted my back gently. From that young age up to now, you've done a great job. Dad, I already guessed that the relationship between you and Mr. Clarivan was not that of a typical student and teacher, but I didn't guess that you were the owner of the pellet. My father mumbled with a weak smile. I'm sorry for not telling you in advance, I said, burying my face in my father's arms. It's all right, Tia. You must have had a reason for doing that. Oh, really? My father was also saying the same things the twins told me. As I relaxed, my body became a little comfortable. Even after releasing me from the hug, my dad kept on patting my head. For a while, every noble that I meet will only be talking about you. My father suddenly stopped talking and asked me, Tia, yeah, did your grandfather know? I forgot for a moment. The fact that there's still the final boss left. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Before dinner at the Lombardi mansion begins, Clarivan stopped by the dining hall and was packing up a small basket. It contained simple food to eat, such as bread and fruit that the dining hall's employees had prepared. It'll start soon, Clarivan muttered as he looked over the long table. The dining hall was already full of delicious dishes for dinner, but the sumptuous display didn't give him an appetite. Although his house was attacked, it was not enough reason to intervene in the dinner with immediate people who are taking care of him at the Lombardi mansion. Above all, it was because he knew that today's dinner was going to be an uncomfortable one. Suddenly reminded of himself in a model position, made Clarivan nauseous. Just imagined it was uncomfortable. I'm going back to my room as soon as possible. Out in the dark hallway, Clarivan put a basket on his side and began to speed up his pace. He was like that when he turned around the corner. Mr. Clarivan, from the other side of the corridor, Gallihan walked over, calling for Clarivan, with a fresh smile on his face that has not changed at all, even in his middle 40s. Lord Gallihan. However, Clarivan wasn't very happy to see Gallihan today. Did you finish the conversation with Lady Florentia? Clarivan asked carefully. Yeah, I was a little surprised that it ended well. I see, Clarivan said, half relieved, but he was still uncomfortable. This was because all this time he had also been tricking Gallihan. Clarivan, who made up his mind, opened his mouth. Well, Lord Gallihan, but Gallihan cut him off. Mr. Clarivan, yes. Thank you. Gallihan, who suddenly said so, bowed his head before Clarivan. End of chapter 227. Chapter 228. Why? Why are you doing this? Embarrassed, Clarivan approached Gallihan to stop him. Gallihan said, smiling comfortably at Clarivan, because Tia wasn't alone, thanks to you, Clarivan. Ah, as Tia's father. I wanted to say thank you for looking after my daughter. Clarivan was silent for a moment. He had so many thoughts that he felt like once he opened his mouth, a mess of tangled words would pour out. After taking a few breaths, Clarivan carefully opened his mouth. Thank you is something that I should say, he chuckled at the end of his words. You don't know how much my life has changed because of meeting Lady Florentia, Lord Galliahan, taking care of the Lombardi house and teaching the heirs. Clarivan thought that he was withering away. Day by day, he did what was given to him and didn't have any clear goal in mind. In addition, he was also greatly disappointed that Lulak's grandchildren, whom he had been teaching for quite some time, were more ordinary. And then Clarivan met Florentia. I feel like I've met someone who recognizes me and values my worth. It's like being reborn. The succession training room was decorated like a playroom for children. The room was filled with low desk chairs, colorful cushions, and dainty dolls. But then, the excitement he felt at the moment when he welcomed Lady Florentia, who showed up with sharp eyes. If it weren't for Florentia, I would be lonely until I die. Clarivan bowed his head with a big smile at the old memory that was overwhelming, even as he thought of it now. Thank you, Lord Galliahan, Clarivan said, fixing the basket on his arm. Have a good evening with your family. That's when Clarivan greeted politely and tried to pass by Galliahan's side. However, Gallian's hand grabbed Clarivan's shoulder. Lord Galliahan? Clarivan's eyes shook as he looked down at Galliahan's hand on his shoulder. What is it? Mr. Clarivan, Gallihan said and asked with a distinctive grin, where are you going? The dinner is about to begin, so I shall go to my room. Would you be fine with just eating dinner with that food? Gallihan said, pointing at the basket. No, I'm okay with this, really. But I'm not okay. Gallihan was still smiling. His smiling face was clearly the same, but his green eyes were fierce. Clarivan somehow got a little scared. Galliahan's fingers gripping his shoulder also dug a little deeper. Lord Galliahan? Then Galliahan asked, are you going to leave Tia alone in front of my father? That's you two lied together. Galliahan's fingers squeezed Clarivan's shoulder even tighter. You have to take responsibility as well. Huh? Clarivan frowned. I don't want to. I'm also afraid of the Lord. He wanted to shout that way, but when he looked into Galliahan's eyes, which folded beautifully and wouldn't budge, Clarivan eventually replied, with his head down. Okay, haha, that's great then. Let's go inside. Gallihan patted Clarivan's shoulder and pushed him against his back. I told the chef to cook a lot of seafood that Clarivan likes. Yes, how do you know that I'll be attending? It's all going according to plan. Haha, being pushed by Gallihan, who was trying to gloss it over, Clarivan wondered. Wasn't it a coincidence that we met in this hallway? Thinking of Florentia, who is completely different from Gallihan, he has vaguely thought that she probably resembles her late mother. Well, maybe the one she truly resembles is Gallihan. Clarivan thought so as he was dragged into the dining hall helplessly. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Clarivan, how come you are here? When I ask him with a look, Clarivan looks at my father with a somewhat helpless face. I didn't quite understand, but it seems to be about him being dragged to dinner because of my father. Oh, I'm hungry. It's been a long time since we all gathered together like this. The twins and Shannonette came in. It's been a while, Mr. Pellet. Shannonette gently greeted Clarivan. Although it was a family gathering, no one seemed to be uncomfortable with Clarivan here. Yes, it's been a while, Lady Shannonette. When greetings come and go like that, everyone's here. My grandfather arrived. Soon the food came out and the meal began. When the dessert was served over time, I brought it up. Grandfather, I have something to tell you. What is it, Tia? I clenched my fists again, remembering the time I spoke to my father. Let's take it off at once. You know that the West representative became the Brown family at today's meeting, right? Since you've stepped up to the plate, I thought it would work from the beginning. How? Because Tia and the second prince were working together. Grandfather drank wine with a smile. He has complete trust in me. Thinking that he do, my heart became heavier. Then my father gave me a look as if to cheer for me. You've taken the money that Angenes owed to the Lombardis from pellets before, right, Grandpa? I did. At that time, the pellet company lent money to Angenes and secured the land as collateral. Oh, you must have taken advantage of that, huh? Very good, ha ha ha. My grandfather's laughter grew smaller. Soon he tilted his head and asked me, by the way, how did you manage to obtain the collateral without Clarivan going to the meeting? With this, Grandpa, I quietly handed out Clarivan's contract. Let's see. I, Florentino Lombardi, the owner of pellet company. The voice stopped reading the contract. But the most important part has already come out. That I am the owner of the pellet company. Grandfather was still looking through the contract and Shannonette smiled, shook her head and drank wine. You. I bowed my head with the thought of being reprimanded, but the spark sputtered in the wrong place. Clarivan, you bastard, you should have told me. I'm sorry. Clarivan calmly bowed his head, as if he had expected it to some extent. That's all right, but how can you not take me seriously? Grandpa, it is not Clarivan, it is I. Wait, my grandfather raised his hand to stop me and asked. Then the first business that had been launched after the pellet company was established is the famous Lyra diamond mine, the mine that was stolen from under Lombardi's eyes. It was what I did, but wasn't it the time when you were only 11 years old? It is. Then the grain at Susu that we bought and sold in the east. Yes, that too. What about the Triva wood in the north, which is the base of the eastern trade now? Grandpa asked me again with a voice that I couldn't tell whether he was angry or curious. Really, are you really saying that pellet company is Tia's business? You've been raising pellets since that young age? Yes, without this grandfather's help, without the help of the family. Sometimes I get Lombardi's help. Grandpa didn't know. I nodded as I answered. Grandpa looked at me and Clarivan alternately several times, and all of a sudden, ha 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 ha, bigger laughter burst out than ever before. You're laughing so hard. He even picked up a napkin and dumped the tears from his eyes. That's what I meant, haha. A child of only 11 years old, ha 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 ha. Thank God I was relieved, giving a small sigh. Fortunately, Grandpa didn't look angry. He sipped his wine and laughed, again and again, looking back at the contract. I was worried that Tia was young and lacked experience. To think Tia was the boss of a merchant guild. With my grandfather's reaction, I was able to laugh a little comfortably. By the way, Tia, Janet called me. Wouldn't it be hard to take care of both the pellet company and the Lombardi family? It was a question full of worries. I don't want to give them both up. I am a little greedy, I said as I shook my head. And I didn't raise Pellet alone from the beginning. Clarivan and Violet have done all the hard work. I'm going to leave the pellet business as it is now. Of course, Tia should succeed me and become the head of Lombardy. Well, Grandpa, aren't you mad at me? The atmosphere wasn't bad, but I was still worried. It's not bad for a person to hide some of their abilities. Good job, Tia. My grandfather rather praised me. You're not really angry? Then, grandfather, yes, give me the contract, I said, pointing to Clarivan's contract in my grandfather's hand. It's a life contract. Ah, yes, keep it safe to hold Clarivan tight. My grandfather laughed again as he hummed and returned the contract to me. Oh, another fingerprint. Now Clarivan was smiling comfortably at my grandfather's words and shaking his head as if he couldn't stop him. So you're done with the Anjanas? Grandfather asked me. No. You mean there's more to do, perhaps? Grandfather said, anxiously narrowing his eyebrows. You're not gonna let the Anjanas off the hook? Artia isn't weak-hearted. I still have a debt to collect. Clarivan, how much was it? Clarivan answered my question, wiping his mouth with a napkin. The first is 2,500 gold, and the second is 4,500 gold, a total of 7,000 gold. That is the money that the head of Anjanus borrowed from the Empress secretly with the Henforek estate. Of course, they didn't pay the interest either. If you include the 3-month interest plus the penalty for breaching the contract, it is a little over 8,000 gold. That's what it says. I smiled at my family, I smiled at my family, looking at me, and Clarivan with a slightly amazed look. Oh, and there's more. They destroyed the pellet company and Clarivan's mansion, so we have to get them to pay us back. We can't forget about Violet too. She must have felt anxious in the night's building. Violet needs to take a break too. Didn't you know Violet's personality? For you to be forgiven, you have to pay back for what you've owed. That's what she is. I'll pay you back twice as much. I spoke to Clarivan, making a promise. I'll make you a nice new house, Clarivan. Yes, would you like to raise the company building to a better building? Oh, that would be great. I heard my grandfather laughing while listening to the conversation between me and Clarivan. Yes, yes, that's my granddaughter. At that time, Butler John hastily entered the dining hall. He wouldn't bother with a family dinner if he could. Therefore, my grandfather's face hardened when he saw John coming in with a letter on a tray, and the rigid atmosphere became heavier when John spoke. An urgent letter has arrived from the palace. Grandfather put down the wine glass and opened the envelope of the letter. After reading carefully, he got up right away. Jovanes is in critical condition. I should go to the palace right now. The emperor is in critical condition. Didn't he look fine until the conference? Tia, I looked back when my grandfather told me, you will also go with this grandfather as the successor to the Lombardi family. End of chapter 228. Chapter 229. After the meeting, Luigi Angenas and Ethan Claus returned to Empress Rabini's palace. Flop, the sound of Luigi falling into the couch was loud. It's all over, Luigi muttered, squeezing his head. In addition to being deprived of the territory of Angenas, he was eventually deprived of his position as the Western representative. It's a perfect play. Luigi was still dazed. The pellet company. Should he be angry or afraid? He didn't even have a clue. The deputy head of Lombardy is the owner of the pellet company, huh? He even laughed out of nowhere. In that case, from the first time Clarivan Pellet came to lend money. No, from that time with Susu. No, that's not it either. Luigi shook his head, muttering to himself. The reason they needed the head of Susu was because the Western Development Project failed. And the reason that the project failed, Luigi Angeles covered his mouth with both hands. Where in the hell did you start? Luigi, standing on the back of the sofa. Empress Rabini called her younger brother coldly. Shut up. The Empress, who shed sad tears while holding the Emperor's sleeves in the conference hall, was nowhere to be found. Her complexion was white, but the fire remained in her eyes. Rabini curled up her hands, looking at Luigi with a death glare, wanting to tear his mouth to stop its chattering. The leather of the chair made a horrifying noise as Rabini scratched her nails. Jovanes, that cowardly man. It didn't matter when the lowly second prince and Florentia Lombardi began to work together. In the end, it was Jovanes who put a knife in the back of Angenas. From the day he became engaged to Rabini, Jovanes had never been a decent spouse for a single moment. He was constantly weighing on Angenas and was only called to worship him, and then he would covet new women. Perez was the only illegitimate child that Rabini missed out on among the many seeds of infidelity, and that mistake was now strangling Rabini. I should have killed him when he was in his mother's womb. Rabini muttered coldly. No, isn't it something we have to talk seriously about? What? The second prince, if we apologize well enough for what you've done in the past, isn't there a possibility that he might leave us alone? Luigi said with blank eyes. Or if you call for Florentia Lombardi and try to get along with her? He nodded his head as if he liked his own idea. Even if you kneel down and pray for 3 days and nights, do you think the second prince will leave Anjanus alone? You don't know until you try. Luigi, who screamed at Rabini, even rose from his seat. This is a decision I will make as the head of Anjanus. It's useless even if my sister stops me. Ethan, yes, Empress, cut the tongue off of Luigi. The moment the order was given, Ethan Claus stepped up to Luigi without any hesitation. Whoa, sister, Empress! Luigi freaked out and ran away. However, it happened in an instant. He was caught and Ethan forcibly opened his jaw. Oh, it was when the dark dagger was about to dig into Luigi's mouth. Give it to me. Rabini's white hand took the knife from Klaus and pointed it to Luigi's eyes filled with fear. Head of Anjanas. Rabini laughed in a faintly trembling voice. You who had done nothing for the family except being born as a son had the gall to say that in front of me. No, Luigi trembled and shed tears at the terrifying power of Ethan Klaus, who was holding his jaw. As the head of Anjanas, you will apologize for that lowly thing. Rabini's blue eyes gleamed terribly. Then I'll have to tear your mouth so you can't do that. The blade of the dagger cut a long tail of Luigi's mouth. Red blood gushed out of the cracks. Luigi couldn't even scream. He held his torn mouth in his hand and trembled. Now it's a little quiet. Rabini threw the dagger next to Klaus. The blood-stained dagger rolled casually on the floor. How did I come this far? Rabini said, remembering the days when she had to endure all sorts of shame and humiliation to get the favor of Jovanes. And the only way to deal with this situation crossed her head. Indeed, a smile that can draw a chilling sensation on anyone formed on her red lips. I am the empress of this Lambru Empire, the authority that the second prince and that adorable little girl have not yet taken away from me. And it will remain that way. Rabini summoned one of her maids who had been waiting outside. As soon as she entered, the maid who saw the head of Anjanus bleeding from his mouth became horrified and scared. Did you call Empress? Go and call Maid Otua. Contrary to the horrible view of the room, Rabini's voice was so calm. Yes, Empress, the maid replied quickly and left the room, seemingly running away. Otua, the head maid, Luigi, who shuddered in terrible pain and was only focused on stopping the bleeding of his mouth, opened his eyes wide. Maid Otua was the one who attended right next to the Emperor. No way, and Rabini, who was looking at him, met his eyes. You must have noticed it this time. Rabini threw her handkerchief at Luigi and laughed. What happens if the emperor dies without an appointed crown prince? You know, don't you, Luigi? Ha! But sister. Yes, I have the authority to choose the next heir to the throne. Gulp. Luigi swallowed unconsciously. The taste of metallic blood spread in his mouth, but he was so shocked that he couldn't even notice it. If he can't make my son the crown prince, then I will make my son the crown prince. After a while, Maid Otua stood in front of the empress. Did you call me empress? Maid Otua said without even looking at Luigi's side. Where is His Majesty right now, Maid Otua? He hasn't returned from the hunting yet. If he's gone hunting, he'll be thirsty when he gets back. The Empress put down a small bottle in front of Maid Otua. Maid Otua closed her eyes tightly, with her head down. This wasn't the first time the Empress had put a small glass bottle in front of her. What you gave me the other day, it's still half full. I told you to pour all of it. You must have been lazy again. Empress Rabini spoke as if she were scolding a child. It's not that. Take it. It's not different from that. At the words of the Empress, Maid Otua was forced to put the glass bottle in her pocket. Her fingertips were shaking to bits. It's the poison of a tea-thief spider. Pour all of the contents in the bottle this time. Maid Otua knew well what that meant. From the time the Emperor's order began to poison the Emperor's food little by little, she thought that this day would come. What about my life? Asked Maid Otua. You're asking an interesting question, Empress Rabini then said, raising one corner of her mouth crookedly. Are you going to make a deal with me? That's not what I mean. I only wish that even if I put this poison in His Majesty's drink, my life would be spared. Who is who is it that allowed you to become the head maid now? Maid Otua bit her lips. Although she was a maid, because of the influence of Empress Rabini, she became a maid with a higher position. Towards the maid who was biting her lips and couldn't say anything, Empress Rabini said, Don't forget that one of your blood is still in Anjanas. Okay, Maid Otua only said a word of assent and returned to the palace of the Emperor. Do you believe her? Ethan Claus, who was watching quietly, asked. What if I don't believe her? Then I will follow her. He meant to destroy the accessory to the murder. I'm always happy for your loyalty. I know I can trust you, Empress Rabini said, sitting in a chair for the first time after entering the room. A maid who poisoned the Emperor's liquor with her own hands will be snitching on me. Should I be scared? In addition, she held head maid Otua's family hostage in the Anjanas estate. That maid cannot betray me. Rabini, who said so, ordered Ethan Claus. Go back to the mansion and prepare the troops of Anjanas, and when I send a notice, bring them to the imperial palace. Empress Rubini picked up another handkerchief and said, wiping away the blood on her hands, If His Majesty dies, some disturbing forces may do something dangerous. I accept your orders, Empress. Ethan Claus answered solemnly, but Rabini wasn't looking at him. Her frowning eyes were on the blood spattered on her dress. It was a red blood stain that was imprinted on the blue silk dress and would never be erased. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The sun has set. A carriage-carrying Emperor Jovin's returned to the palace, and it was quite some time later. Rabini took off her blood-stained dress and changed into a new one and sat alone. Rabini didn't move Rabini didn't move, even but her eyelashes, as if the flowing time were deflecting her. How much time has passed? Empress. Rabini turned her eyes straight towards the urgent voice calling her. Your Majesty, the Emperor has fallen. What do you mean? Rabini shouted as she last checked herself in the mirror. Along with her dress, her jewelry was also replaced with simple ones. The Empress dressed up nicely next to the dead Emperor was not good to look at. Well, I've just heard from the Imperial Palace. I think the Empress should go. If it's a false rumor, I'll slit your throat. The Empress burst open the door and shouted. She looked at the mirror a little while ago and only a surprised face remained from the sudden news. Rabini grabbed the hem of her dress and hurriedly walked to the imperial palace. As she neared the emperor's bedroom, the emperor smiled inwardly. This was because the chaotic atmosphere of the imperial palace was evidence that everything went according to plan. Once she got there, "Here you are, Empress," the palace doctor said as he was coming out of the emperor's bedroom, wiping his sweat. Then he said with a sigh of relief, "The emperor has safely overcome the crisis." End of chapter 229. Chapter 230. The Lombardy's carriage my grandfather and I rode made its way quickly toward the imperial palace. Hearing the news that the emperor was in critical condition, although we are on our way, my grandfather didn't look so impatient. "You have a long day. I'm tired, but I already had enough time to relax myself earlier." "True," I replied with a shrug as if I couldn't help it. "But you didn't ask me why I'm taking you with me. I thought you must have something to show me." "Yes, you're right." Grandfather smiled and nodded. Soon he asked me in a subtle voice, "What kind of a relationship do you think Emperor Dorelli and Lombardy have, Tia? Isn't it some kind of a partnership?" "Partnership?" "Yes, since the establishment of the Lambro Empire, both families have been moving together. We've been through a lot together for a very long time, whether we like it or not." The answer comes from how the emperors treated Lombardy for generations. Even though they hated and couldn't tolerate Lombardy's existence, no emperor tried to destroy Lombardy. They've only tried to hold the family's flag. "You've been watching properly." My grandfather smiled satisfactorily at my answer. When the emperor dies, Lombardy goes to the palace for one reason: to confirm the emperor's death with both eyes. This is a little unexpected. I took my back off the chair and asked, "Why do we confirm the death?" "The Dorelli family has been placed in Lombardy's custody, in addition to the assets that have been attributed to the crown. It's kind of like a slush fund. Yes, only the emperor knows and can use the assets. And when the emperor dies, the ownership of the money is temporarily transferred to the head of Lombardy." "Oh, so it's like that. That's a tremendous trust. I can't believe that the money the emperor had been collecting over the years will be handed over to the Lombardy's head. And Lombardy is supposed to announce the existence of the asset and hand it over again when the legitimate heir inherits the throne after the great emperor." Legitimate. The weight of that word was considerable. As I quietly thought it over, my grandfather explained further. "I'm referring to the crown prince, with the approval of the representatives from each region, especially for Lombardy. Of course, there were exceptions," my grandfather said as he sighed briefly mixed with dissatisfaction. "It's been a pain in the neck." The sound of my grandfather rubbing his bearded chin stretched inside the carriage. "Are you referring to the absence of a legitimate heir?" "Yes, Jovin's usually doesn't even want to talk about succession, so no one can guess what's going on inside his head." "If the emperor is truly dead," I asked, holding back the desire to swear, "then the next monarch that has the authority to decide who inherits the throne is the empress." Damn it. After all the trouble of managing to turn the West representative from Anjanis to Brown, you're telling me that she has the authority to decide on who sits on the throne? He can collapse anytime he wants, but to collapse at a time like this, Jovains, you fool, Grandfather said as he clicked his tongue. "By the way, Grandpa, what is it, Tia? How come you're not surprised?" Grandfather tilted his head. My question itself seemed incomprehensible. "When you received the news that His Majesty was in critical condition, you're not surprised at all." My grandfather simply informed his family of the letter's content and stood up to prepare for departure with a calm face. "His Majesty was always healthy, but the message that he is critical is too sudden." Grandfather seemed to be lost in thought for a moment, and after a short silence, a deep voice called me, "Tia." "Yes, Grandpa. As I reach this age, there is one thing I've realized." "What is it?" "That it is true how people reap what they sow." I also agreed. "If you do something good, you will be rewarded. If you do something bad, you'll get punished." Everyone heard that as they were growing up. "Do you know that Jovains poisoned his father, the previous emperor?" "Poisoned? Today I am learning a lot of things I didn't know." I was a little surprised. "The death of the emperor is very confidential. Ordinary people don't even know what the emperor's health was like. Then one day you will suddenly hear the emperor's obituary. Jovains, who poisoned his father, knew this day would come." "But when you say you reap what you sow, does Grandpa think someone poisoned His Majesty?" I told him to be careful about what he eats and drink. Instead of answering, Grandpa clicked his tongue lightly and muttered. Soon after, he looked at me. "Between the second prince and the empress, who do you think did it, Tia?" Grandfather's brown eyes shone coldly in the moonlight from outside. At the same time, though my head was a little confused, I'm calmly composed. "You're saying that that's the only thing we Lombardi have to worry about, right?" Grandfather grinned. I looked at him for a moment before looking out the window. It seemed that my grandfather wasn't expecting an immediate answer from me. I recalled a few days ago returning to Lombardy after handling Balsac over to Sarah. Estira told me to deliver it. I held out a small box to Perez, one bottle of Titi spider venom and one bottle of antidote that you asked for. Thank you, Perez replied, closing the lid of the box again. I'll use it well. I didn't ask Perez how he was going to use it. Perez didn't explain to me either. I was lost in thought like my grandfather. Perez and the Empress, which one of them poisoned Jovains. We've arrived at the Imperial Palace. At the voice of the coachman, both my grandfather and I woke up from our thoughts, looking out of the carriage door. We frowned at the same time. It seems like something happened in the Imperial Palace, Grandpa. The surroundings of the Imperial Palace were chaotic. There were troops moving in groups, and Imperial knights were rushing into the palace. Let's go to Jovan's bedroom. Grandfather hurried and told me. As soon as we reached the corridor where the Emperor's bedroom was located, I could see, in a sense, what was going on. Get out of the way, second prince, the Emperor's shouting echoed throughout the corridor filled with knights. It's worth seeing this spectacle. Grandfather spoke in a low voice. It appears in front of the Emperor's bedroom knights are standing in a row carrying swords. Amid these armed knights are the Empress and Perez staring at each other. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. What did you just say? The Empress asked the palace doctor in a trembling voice. You said that His Majesty crossed the hurdle? Yes, that's right. The Imperial doctor shrunk his shoulders with a sudden unusual pressure. Then the tightly closed bedroom door opened and Paris appeared. Second prince, it seems that news has already been delivered to the Emperor's palace. There was a sign of disapproval in Paris' words. So the prince was already here. I found the Emperor collapsed on the floor. Paris said in a calm voice. How? Empress Rabini was opening her mouth, wanting to find out the situation. Again, the door to the bedroom opened and the knights took one person out. It was Maid Ottawa. Take her to the knights' building. Don't let anyone approach her until I say so. Yes, your highness. Maid Ottawa, who had her arms seized and half dragged by the knights, looked at the empress. You stupid thing. The empress chewed her lips. Maid Ottawa must have made a fool of herself. Mithi spider venom was a deadly poison that few people knew, and the symptoms were similar to those of a normal sudden illness. And so there was little risk of getting found out. But something was strange. Empress Rabini thought she would be drugged right away. But Perez was just staring at her. The moment she realized it, the Empress laughed unwittingly. There is no evidence, and there was one more idea that strikes her. Step aside, Prince. Perez stood unmoving, guarding by the door of the bedroom. I have to check His Majesty's condition myself, the Empress said, clenching her fists with joy. You can't. The Emperor is dead. The second prince is now trying to somehow conceal the Emperor's death. I am the Empress of this empire. Maid Utua was dragged away, but she didn't open her mouth easily. As long as her dreadful family was in the hands of Anjanus, Maid Utua couldn't betray the Empress. So Ravini's voice grew louder and harsher. His Majesty is safe and sound. It's His Majesty's order to not let anyone in. Huh, what are you talking about? There's no way a dead emperor can speak. The empress snorted unconsciously. His Majesty is resting now. I have the right to see how he's faring. Eventually, a screaming high voice rattled through the whole corridor. Perez stared at the screaming Ravini before asking, Why are you doing this? Dot. His Majesty is not well and said that he will not meet anyone. So why are you being so forceful? Forceful? Did you not believe my words that His Majesty is safe? Or are you convinced that it will not be possible? Perez's red eyes stared coldly at the Empress. I think it's the latter. I wonder why. Get out of the way. Instead of answering the prince, the Empress took a step closer. No, Perez stepped forward and blacked the Empress. Step aside. The moment he grabbed the Empress by the shoulder, you dare touch me with your filthy hand. Slap. The Empress slapped Perez on the cheek. Do you think I'm going to step down because you're blocking me? The Empress shouted before calling her attendant. Go and let them know. After hesitating for a while at the behest of the Empress, the servant quickly ran down the hall. And after a while, get out of the way, your highness. How dare you disobey the Empress? Different groups of knights, each following to the call of the Empress and Perez, were in a yelling match against each other. Those who were contacted belatedly joined their respective forces, and the corridor of the bedroom was gradually filled with no time to step up. Shame on you as an imperial knight. Who's going to tell who? Tension flowed between the knights, which had been divided into two forces, looking like they would draw their swords at any moment. Get out of the way, second prince. The empress cried out loud once more. However, there was a faint smile on her face. Despite such a big uproar, there was no reaction in the bedroom. This could never have happened if the emperor was alive. The empress was convinced of her victory. The emperor's absolute power was right in front of her eyes, and she seemed to be able to hold it if she reached out. It was then. What are you doing right now? With a roar, the night split like water. Empress, Prince, both of you, stop this instant. At the end of the hallway, Lola Lombardi, with his hands behind him, stood with angry eyes. End of chapter 230.